On Friday, we went over the that sheet that I handed out to you with the food chains and the food pyramid, right? Not the food pyramid, but the pyramid of numbers. Yes? Yes, yeah. So we're going to kind of talk through that a little bit more today. I'm not talking about food chains so much, more about the energy that's flowing through the system and the amount, the biomass, and the amount of organisms at each level. So one of the ways that we gather data in a food chain is through the biomass. That's the total mass of all organisms in a food chain, called the pyramid of biomass. It's the total mass of all the organisms in a given food chain. You also have a specific biomass at each level. The reason why this is important is we always talk about how the food transfers from one level to the next, one trophic level to the next. It's the same thing with the biomass, the energy, and the number of organisms at each level. Transfer of this biomass from one level to the next is not efficient at all. And I don't remember which class I talked about it and which class I didn't. But in one of my classes I did talk about consuming. You eat a cow. Do you eat the whole cow? No. Are we consuming all of the cows in the world? No. So some of those organisms, some of those cows are never consumed. Well, some parts of the cow, you're not eating the teeth, the bones. You're not typically eating the eyeballs. Most of us don't eat the guts of it, and the tissues and the fat. And so we're not very efficient of how we actually eat the cow as well. So much of that never gets consumed. We typically only eat 10% of the organisms from the previous level. So the ecological pyramid is displaying, it really shows us that diminishing amount of energy biomass at higher levels. A number that you should highlight and draw, whatever you need to do, is this 10%. I kind of went over it a little bit, but it's 10%. 10%. Let me see if I can undo that. Do my opacity. Not letting me do it. Is that better? 10%. So that typically means we don't consume 90% of it. We're only getting the 10% of it. This also means, or this is also true for energy. So the energy that we create, or that, God bless you, producers create, we're actually only getting 10% of that energy. Well, you think, what's happening to the rest of the energy? So let's think about blades of grass. Grass gets their energy from the sun. They need their own energy, right? They're autotrophs. So they're going to actually use some of their energy themselves, right? Just to survive. They also need to create their own energy. So while you do the process of cellular respiration, that takes energy as well. So survive, to actually create that energy takes energy. And then the fact that we're not eating all of it is wasted energy. We waste energy as heat energy. It's a waste product. So we're actually only getting 10%, if we're eating a carrot, we're only getting 10% of all the carrot's energy. So it's very, very inefficient as you go up the food chain. So I have a picture here. And I want just a couple things to note. This is one single food chain. You've got your levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? which corresponds, so that's your trophic levels. It corresponds to what type of producer-consumer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, so on and so forth to the top. It's showing us that much of the energy is lost as heat. So it's about 80% that is lost as heat. 10% the actual organism consumes and uses. And then the other 10% is what gets transferred to each level. 10%, and so on and so forth through each level. This is true for 3 different pyramids, and you need to know the 3 different pyramids. It's the pyramid of biomass, the pyramid of energy, and the pyramid of numbers. Biomass, how much you mass at each level. Energy, the amount of energy that is used at each level. And then numbers is literally the number of organisms that occupy each level. So what you'll need to do, I will give you a number, say 1,000 grams. So this is a pyramid of biomass. I give you 1,000 grams. You should be able to figure out every other level based on this rule of 10%. So what would be the herbivores or the primary consumers? What would be the biomass of the primary consumers in this? Scott. Yep. As you go down, the 10% rule is that you get 10% more. As you go up, what would be your tertiary, the second level carnivorous? Ali.
100.
So then what would be our producers? Anybody? Producers. Evan, was it a hand up? No? Yeah. Yep. 100,000 grams because we go 10% more. And then our third would be 10 grams. And then our top consumer would just be 1 gram.
Is this energy or biomass right now?
When you're in grams, it's biomass. Energy would be joules, and numbers would just be numbers. Okay? This one is starting to talk about how we impact the environment. Tomorrow you'll watch the movie, and then really on Wednesday we're really going to talk about more of global warming, greenhouse effect, and all of that. And that's really where we're going to end, is how we're impacting and the kind of changes that we're trying to make in the environment. This biological magnification, you also please write down another thing, because it's also known as biological, oh, that's not a very good color. Let's try that again. Biological amplification. Magnification, amplification, they mean the exact same things. Magnification, when you're talking about a microscope, means to magnify, means to get bigger, right? Amplification, anybody does music with amps, what do amps do?
They get
Louder, right? So bigger, louder, amplification, magnification, meaning that it gets bigger, okay? Really meaning it gets more concentrated. As you go up the food chain, so this is the opposite of your regular food pyramid. When you go up the food chain, you get less and less amount of organisms at each level, and the concentration of the different chemicals in the substances gets magnified. So I'm going to explain this, and then I'll give you an example. And then I'll kind of talk about it in like layman's terms. you get the buildup of pollutants. One pollutant in the 80s was DDT. Maybe the 70s. Anybody heard of DDT? Can you tell me about DDT?
No.
Okay. Can you tell me about it? No, that's chlorofluorocarbons. That's CFCs, which we'll talk about on Wednesday. DDT is what farmers, crop planes. If you ever remember or heard of crop planes, they would dust all crops with this chemical DDT. Very, very toxic. The reason why they did it is to pesticide, right? They didn't know how it would impact all of the organisms. Well, it would get in the soil. Then the soil with the water would run off into rivers, lakes, and then it would impact the zooplankton, the northern pike. They wouldn't die of it, but they would get the DDT in their bodies. And then as it goes through the food chain, it gets more concentrated in each successor, in each following organism. And so finally the top consumer, it was so magnified, so concentrated that they would die. Or they would produce, they would be able to reproduce. Or in this example, the shells of the eagle eggs, the bald eagle, were so soft and brittle that they wouldn't be able to survive. The bald eagle used to be on the endangered species list, and then there was a law that said no longer we could use DDT. The environmentalists really took hold of this. They bred safe, good bald eagles, and the bald eagles are no longer on the endangered species list of this. Polar bears are, but for a different reason. Because we're ruining the climate. So that's a whole different thing that we'll talk about on Wednesday. Mercury poisoning. Who's heard of it? Some of us heard of it. This is what's happening. Biological magnification. Mercury is getting into the water. It's infecting the fish. The fish aren't really dying from it. Who's being harmed from it? We are, the top consumers. We are polar bears. Penguins in the Arctic are dying from mercury poisoning. And what's happening is it gets so magnified in the fish, if we consume too much fish, we could die. We could either get mercury poisoning or we can die from it. And so that's why if you talk to any nutritionist, they would say yes, or dietitian, yes, eat fish, but in small amounts. If you were to eat tuna 3 times a day, every day for a year, you would most likely die from mercury poisoning. Now imagine those penguins that don't have a choice. We have a choice of what we consume, right? They don't have a choice, and so it's really going to impact them. And for some reason, I loved talking about biological magnification so much that I put 3 different slides about it. I apparently put them in and forgot to take one out. So this is also showing you the concentration level of the toxic chemicals in each of the following food chains. So remember, this is going to be your first trophic level, this is your second trophic level, and this is your top consumer, and this one will be the one that's impacted the most.
What's ppm?
Oh, sorry, parts per million.
All right.
ppm, sorry, parts per million. I did that in every class, forgot this one. Sorry about that. Parts per million.
Thank you for getting them.
You're welcome. Parts per million. And then this is showing you the opposite effect in the fact that a food pyramid, or not food, I always say food pyramid, energy pyramid, you have the biggest amount on the bottom and the smallest on the top, whereas the arrow, it's showing the opposite in the fact that magnification is actually impacting more of the top than it is the bottom level. And that's what that's showing. Okay, done with how we're bad. And now talking about population and interactions. We'll talk more about how we're bad on Wednesday, how we're hurting our environment on Wednesday. Now we're going to more talk about populations and interactions between organisms.